Welcome to the Asia Society. I'm Rachel Cooper. I'm the Director of Cultures Diplomacy here at Asia Society, and delighted that you can join us for this panel tonight. This is part of Asia Society at the Movies, and of course tonight's panel is a real reflection on From Mao to Mozart, the iconic film that chronicles Isaac Stern's original trip to China in 1971. We have three esteemed panelists with us tonight, all who were there. First, David Stern, Isaac Stern's son, who is a renowned conductor. His musical leadership really transcends geographies, and he is very prominent all across the globe. He also runs the Paris-based opera studio and period instrument ensemble Opera Fuoco, as well as being the artistic advisor and chief conductor of the Shanghai Baroque Festival and the chief conductor of the Palm Beach Opera in Florida. So thank you so much for joining us. Second, I'd like to introduce Tiffany Hu, who grew up in China and studied violin at the renowned Shanghai Conservatory. At age 15, she was selected by Mr. Stern to play for him while he was touring China, and she has gone on to perform throughout the world and now is based in Los Angeles and continues her work as a musician. And finally, Wang Jian, the world-renowned cellist who began studying the cello with his father when he was 4. He also was at the Shanghai Conservatory, and he was featured in the celebrated film From Mao to Mozart, as well as in the musical Encounters, which chronicled the 1999 visit by Mr. Stern and his family in China, which is a wonderful film, and we'll show some clips tonight from that film. We're delighted to have all three artists with us tonight to reflect on not only that time period when they first came together in China, but their lives as musicians and the power of music to transform people, which we will be able to talk about a little bit more as we go on in the panel. But to start, we'd like to show you a clip of the film, the ending of the musical Encounters film shot in 1999 with some clips from the earlier. So please go ahead and show that. Thank you.
This passion.
那听到这种激情，那听到这种，
There's only one word that I can use for it.
只有我只对这个只能用一句话来说，
Involvement.
一定要全身心的参与进去。
I have to hear you involved with it.
要听到
You
全身心的在。
Here. Every note is your life.
每个音都要有生命力，都是你的，就是也是自己的生命吧。
We have to feel that every note is to you an important part of that moment that you're living. Being a musician is not a profession, and it's not just a job, and it's not something occasional. It's the totality of your life and your devotion to something in which you believe profoundly. And you have to believe in order to make other people believe. music is not important for creating musicians. It's creating a civilized society. The sooner we realize that strength, the better it will be for the future. I look forward to being a part of that for as long as I can live.
Such a powerful statement, and in some ways it speaks to living beyond the moment of our physical being, because I feel like that statement says lives on. And David, I'm just wondering if you would share a little bit about thinking about what that moment meant, that idea of the passion of music, and sharing that in the kind of cross-cultural exchange that started in '79 and continues to this day.
Yeah. Well, I would actually like to say that it started in '79, but it started in 1920 when he was born. You know, when we're talking about passion, but really it's a question of faith. It's a question of believing in what music is and what music can be. At home, yes, we were they were transplanted Europeans, my parents coming to New York, and we were an American family, Jewish family, but we believed in music. That was what was the code for the way one talked, the way one thought, the way one took decisions. Music was just a way of understanding the entire world, getting along with someone, having tension and resolution, dealing with dissonance. Everything kind of came in under the understanding of what it meant to make music. Sharing music as a chamber musician, sometimes being the soloist, sometimes accompanying. And there were so many lessons, and they were all taken for granted because that's the way we lived. So when he came to China in '79, he was just continuing what he had talked about all his life and what he believed in. But it was a question of faith, and faith makes you realize that there are things on this planet that will last us all and that are much more important. And if you serve these timeless concepts, then it just makes you understand and appreciate how insignificant we can be considering the mass amount of information in the world, and then how significant every small step can be in and of itself. And so when we came to China, he came with tabla rasa. He didn't come to teach the way of Western music to a society that had been separated from. It was not at all this feeling of having to come and impart wisdom. It was sharing something, because that's what music is all about. It's also about sharing, about listening. If you are a musician, the first thing you have to be is a listener. You cannot just play. If you are not listening, and if you're not using silence, then you cannot understand how to make music. And so when he came, it was as much to learn from what he was going to see than to be able to impart things that he just believed in. And so it was connecting through music. It was not imposing anything. It was trying to understand how the two sides can get together. And the lesson we came out with was, this is a place that is going to explode in the next decade. And we could never have imagined when we came back in 1999 that it will have expanded as much as it did in 20 years. It was truly amazing. And music has had an incredibly important role in that development in China. And it's something that I've been able to appreciate since 1999, having gone there almost every year, except for this pandemic year, to make music in one way or the other with different ensembles. It was the beginning of a very beautiful relationship.
So we'll come back to your relationship with China over these years, but I just want to go back to '79 and then '99, because one of the things that jumps out from the film is the really human interaction, the people to people. People say people to people exchange, but this felt so personal. and you see this kind of, dare I say, love that's exchanged by people who have something sharing. They may not share the English language and the Chinese language, but they share music. And there's that hunger that really comes out in the film from the musicians. What
Absolutely.
was your experience?
Well, we always say we musicians, music is is a universal language, and we say it so often that after a while you just think it's a saying, it's just a bad motto, and it's been overused. And for me, this movie shows that it actually is true. It is an international language, and there is a way of expressing oneself through music that cannot be expressed through language, and so it defies any language border. And we're not talking about Western music. We're not talking about only Beethoven and Bach. We're talking about all music. All music speaks to a part of the soul and the brain that language doesn't attain, and it was so evident. The thing is also, my father was exactly as he played. He was a gentle person. He could have these moments of rigor, but people felt like they knew him from watching him perform, because he needed so much to connect to the public. And that direct relationship with the audience, and that incredible instinct he had of making a phrase that had its own rhetoric, that spoke to a public, that actually contained functional ideas. That was his way, his manner of speaking, his manner of playing. So it made a very natural conduit for him to be able to communicate with all these wonderful people that we met during our time. And that was why that connection with Tiffany in the masterclass was immediate. There was something, he was so happy to be able to share it. And he didn't talk down to any of the kids. He was trying to support, he was trying to give as much support as possible in those quick connections. But then I remember also just being in the room when this little kid with the cello walked in and played for us, and we were all transfixed. And this no good kid plays, and my father was so happy to hear Wang Jin play. It was exactly made of the same material that my father breathed, and that was music is all that matters.
Well, maybe this is the time to jump over to Wang Jin's music. Oscar, if you could play that clip. I know we've just jumped to another place, but I think since you've teed that up, I want to be able to share, because there's such a wonderful clip in the two films. Could you show us that?
And Wang Jin, cellist, has begun a major career all over the world.
我走在房间里，突然看见有一个人穿了一个大红的衬衫，那时候我们中国人穿都是灰色的，很少有一个人穿大红衬衫。然后他那个眼镜架在头上，很奇怪。
I was so surprised.
No, I was very scared when I first saw him.
Scared.
This is violinist Tiffany Hu, who also played in Mao to Mozart.
Was it somewhere I heard this piece before?
No, that's what I played in the movie. But I think
From the movie, which one?
I think I played better. When
In
I
the
was
movie?
little. Yeah, maybe.
It's possible.
Thank you very much. That's a lot of confidence.
But today, the rehearsal I heard you play was really good.
What were you playing in the movie? Actually, I don't remember.
Tartini Sonata. But people know me not playing the violin anymore. They just only know me but singing Tartini. So
Yes,
it's a new version.
I remember you were singing. Yes.
It's quite unique. It's singing version.
And here she is 20 years ago.
That's right. That's right. Go ahead. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Beautiful. Now start it once more and play it as if you were singing it. Ah, good girl, good girl, good girl, good girl. That's all right, you see.
So, Wang Jian, I'd like to turn to you now. And we're really pleased that you can now speak about a little bit about what it's like to have been a child playing the cello. I know you started at age 4. How old were you in this film, in the clip we just saw?
I was 10 years old. I was 10 years old. Yes, yeah. Of course, being 10, I don't actually quite remember a lot of things. In fact, many of these memories are actually perhaps implanted in me by people who tell me, who told me what happened. But I do remember very vividly going to that room. Yes, of course, I saw Mr. Stern with his a very bright colored shirt and with his glasses on top of his head. But I think the overwhelming feeling was a sense of occasion. Because although I had already played many concerts prior to this concert, none of which was with this kind of atmosphere, because the room was absolutely packed, and all the professors, important professors, and the deans, they were all there, and of course, then with this camera crew, you realize something's very, very different, because I had never really played in front of a movie camera. I started playing actually for maybe a minute or two, and then Mr. Sterner was telling the film crew to film this. So I remember the crew coming up to me and setting up the light and started filming. That made me even more nervous than I was. But I think, obviously, that meeting absolutely changed my life. And it is not until much later I realized what it meant for me personally. As I look at my own playing, I used to be very uncomfortable to look at myself at 10 years old, because I think, as many people don't feel comfortable looking at themselves when they were young. But now I have a proper distance from that child now. I can look at him from a much more distance away. Yes, I do hear that there is musicality in that child's playing. And yes, I do feel that although I was only 10 and technically I was not really perfect, but there is this spark of musicality that I am today always looking for in young players. And also I do realize, because I have taught many students on and off, and I judge many competitions, and I do realize that this spark is very precious and it's very, very rare. But I also realize there are many kids in this world with this spark. And by all means, not all of them will become musicians, which is a great pity. That I consider myself extraordinarily lucky to have met Mr. Stern at that age. And his approval and his attention inevitably already launched my career at a very young age, because when Isaac Stern says he likes somebody's playing, people listen. So what I'm trying to say is that there are so many kids in this world at this moment with the same spark and many even greater talent than I had. And many of them will not become musicians. So if you think about how many musicians Mr. Stern had pushed forward onto the world stage, these great, great players, he has done a lot for music in this world, in history, actually. That is actually unique. I can't think of any other musician who did that, who had this kind of impact in the music world. He was absolutely unique. And what he did was basically making sure that as much as he can to help young kids who has this spark to fulfill their talent and to become musicians. I was one of those very, very lucky kids.
We'll come back to a little bit more thinking about that. But Tiffany, I know you also had that experience and that whole notion of being an embodied artist, you know, the physicality of music is something that Mr. Stern talks about frequently. So it's not just passion as an emotion, but it's also the entire body being involved in the music making. Tell us a little bit about your experience.
Well, in the movie, as you see, that I was called and was sitting in the audience on stage without knowing if I will get a chance to play, because I was just a middle school student, but somehow I was just preparing the piece I was playing. It was Spring Sonata, and he played that same sonata in his recital. And when he looked at the list, he just picked out the Spring Sonata. Oh, I want to hear that. So I was called and got up, and without preparing, was so nervous, and in front of the whole audience, because at the time he was one of the first musicians from the West come to China, and after the revolution. So people from all over the country and flew over and took a train, days of trains to come to see to be at the mass class. In fact, the hall was packed, and they couldn't even seat everybody. So, and a lot of people would sit on the stage. So I was called into play, and I played it. And he just, the way he taught me, and you can see from the movie, that he not only he just telling me that you need to imagine, it's a springtime and how the birds, the flowers, and it just opened up in my mind all of a sudden. And of course, hearing him play, and I'm like, okay, that's right. He's just like a lot of imagination, which we were not taught, because in China, a lot of focusing on technique instead of musicality. So that really completely opened up in my mind. And so he was very happy about the results, but it has impacted me throughout my musical life. And I went to Europe and studied in Europe and played concert. And like a lot of people say, I know that technically I'm probably not the best technician, but musically, I'm always pursue the music. I want to touch people. That's what everybody say. Well, you're playing so beautiful and you're very touching. He had impacted me tremendously in that sense.
I mean, it's so interesting that you use the word touching, and now that I'm thinking about it, the English word has different meanings. So there's the touch, the technical side, that whole thing about bowing and using the entire bow, and the touch and the physicality, and that touching is also about touching your heart and reaching people at a different level. So I think you've brought up both of those.
Right, absolutely. And he just opened up the whole from then, the China, all the student, the teacher, everybody is more emphasized on phrasing, because we didn't know. All we did was we just listened to some recordings, but we didn't know from our own, it's like your imagination, your own feeling. How do you interpret it, this phrase, this phrase, how you project to the audience. So he really opened up the whole world to everybody in China.
I mean, I think it's interesting because there's a reflection in the film about changes that were noticed between that first trip in '79 and then 20 years later in the relationship of the Chinese musicians to music. And I'm wondering, I'd love to hear from all three of you what your reflection is on what that change was. I mean, you were part of that change, yet that was also what the music brought to people's lives. And maybe we could start with you, David.
Well, thanks. I think in the same way that Tiffany was just talking about, the emphasis on the music, on the interpretation rather than technical ease is something that was definitely more in evidence 20 years after we had been there. And then ever since then, it's something that has become more and more prevalent. I'd go so far as to say for those who get it, who understand, who have that spark that Wanjin was talking about, it's the spark that music is something that is very personal and that you can express. And in a world, and I'm not even talking about politics because that takes on a completely different level, but just on the sheer enormous population in China, being able to come out and speak and say something differently from the rest, being able to express yourself differently and say something that is coming from the deepest part of one's soul, is a freedom that is not to be underestimated. And I believe that one of the impacts, one of the most important impacts of Western music on Chinese society in these past 20 years, in the past 40 years, has been this understanding that through music, the individual all of a sudden flowers and blossoms and connects to something in a very personal way and is not following rote and is not being judged by just technical conditions. And the more that develops, the more there will be people who believe in this expression and this importance of freedom of expression. And I find that something that's been very compelling, especially since now there are more and more singers not doing opera in China. And my work with them has been developing and finding their way of expressing through, of course, a libretto, a text, coming through music. I find that this need to express oneself, which is the need that we all have to express ourselves through music, is just as important, if not more now in China. And it's a very positive element.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that comment that is made about how each moment is alive, each note is your being alive in this moment. And in a way, that's the kind of freedom you're talking about. It's
exactly.
It's attention and intention, both
right.
at the same time.
Well
John, what about you? Sorry.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think what happened in 1979 is inevitable because Mr. Stern was a very, very special man. I was very lucky to get to know him a little bit more when I arrived in the United States to study. And he gave me lessons frequently, and he would sometimes play some German music with me. And if you just speak to him and you listen to him speak, you realize he speaks the way he plays, or he plays the way he speaks. It's just that he looks at the world in a very, very different way. It's almost as if that he is in the zone all the time. When he talks to you, sometimes I get very scared and nervous because you cannot talk banters with him. It doesn't work because he does not talk banters. He talks about something that's right away inside of you, in your soul. And then he would say something that would just make you think somebody's revealed the truth to you about something. It's just quite incredible. So he had this incredible natural talent to communicate with people. I think, as I understand it today, musicians, perhaps for me, it's a bit like some of these shamans in primitive societies, in old cultures. I wouldn't say primitive, but old cultures, that we are trained, or we are talented, we are pushing ourselves to get into this zone very, very quickly, so as to bring the others into this world. Mr. Stern, I think he was born with this vision in his heart. He was born with this ability to hear from the sound of these melodies, these harmonies, this music, a world that is incredible. And then he plays music to bring us into that world. And that's what musicians do. And when he first visited China, classical music was very new in China. People were still learning it as an art form, but they did not use music as a very necessary and important tool to achieve communion with each other. Classical music is unique in this world. That is the only music that has been elevated away above being mere entertainment, which is very important. But classical music has been elevated above that and beyond that as a almost like a ceremonial ritual that we gather together and listen to music, and we achieve communion. Because what you're hearing is the language of the souls of everybody that has passed and living and maybe in the future. So Mr. Stern showed with his playing, with his teaching, that music is not something you put on the wall to admire. Music is something you take into your hands, something you take and open your soul. And he showed that every day we wear a mask going around to fit into society, to be amicable with other people, to get along with people. But when you play music, that mask comes off right away, because only what's inside matters. And if you're able to do that, and if people can hear that, they will also take their mask off in the audience. And when everybody does that, then it's a great concert, because in that moment, your hearts will be singing together. And I think that's what the power of music is. And he was the first one who showed how to do that. And what a great, there could not have been a greater teacher than him, because he was the epitome of playing with all his heart and not wearing a mask at all when he's with music. It is so raw. And I've always thought that that man could play a shoebox and still make music out of it. And he was one of the very few musicians, string players, that could turn a mistake, a scratch, or anything that people would consider as not perfect into art. You know, that's the greatest sign of a great artist, that a good musician requires perfection to make music, but a great one can turn some unintentional mistakes into its special place and make that into something special. He uses, for example, these sometimes scratch notes as a color. And that's why I always thought that he could play anything. He could play any shoebox and there'll be music coming out, because just like the way he spoke, he was, first of all, a philosopher in his heart. And then he just uses music to express this incredible world he has inside. And people felt that.
You know, I love that you started with the image of a shaman. And you also brought up the ceremonial, because those are the places that are about transformation. And they're about bridging between worlds. And
that's right.
That's beautifully stated, really. Tiffany, let me turn to you now on the same question.
Yes, I wanted to say he emphasized, as you see in the movie, music's not just one color. It's all kinds of color. So when you perform, you have to think, what color you have to make it interesting. So he is also a very caring person. In fact, I met him again when I came to the United States in '85. I went to backstage, and he has extremely a good memory. And he called my name as I was waiting to meet him in the backstage. So then we reconnected again. He is just so personal. He's just not a big impact on the musical world. He saved Carnegie Hall. He does all the things that he care about people. And like, for instance, I came here and he was asking me, "Oh, is anything? Are you all right?" And I said I lived far away. And then he connected me with Mr. Colburn. And then just very caring. And then of course, he always, whenever he comes to West Coast, I always play for him. He wants to hear me play, or your progress, you need to do this. And it's just he's just very caring and to the world, and it's very big impact in the music industry.
So I'm going to go back to you, David, because you have been going back and forth to China. So the impact, having gone just a few years after the Cultural Revolution was done, and you had that first generation of both musicians and composers in China who went to conservatory, and many who have become very important globally. But you've seen a lot of those changes in music making and in the general population. I wondered if you could just give us some thoughts.
Well, I think what's really been beautiful to watch is that if in 1979 there was the first, so my father arrived and Ashkenazi went over as well, and the Philadelphia Orchestra, of course, came even earlier. So there were these bridges that were being built. And then, yes, there was more of an exchange, and there were a number of Chinese students who came and studied in Europe and in America. And then, of course, in orchestras, there were more and more foreigners coming from America or from Europe to become concertmaster or principal of a section and this and that. And now you have, instead of a German concertmaster, you have a Shanghaiese student who has gone to Europe, who has developed, who's come back and speaks Shanghaiese to the rest of the orchestra and acts as concertmaster. And you have Tendun, who's who's hired by the Met, and you have Wang Jin, who comes and performs and teaches and is part of the global music world. And we've gone so far from the idea of certain Westerners coming in and helping out. Now it's a two-way street, and Long Long has opened up a huge door that is constantly being opened in both directions, and I think that's all extremely positive. And God knows if it were politicians that had been running all this none of this would have happened, because the doors would just never have opened up so easily. And this whole attitude of trying to connect to different audiences and trying to speak through music has trumped, and I use that word specifically, has trumped all political walls. Music will never be able to cure all evils, but every little step has been important. And I find that my father's arrival, it's wonderful. Everyone I talk to in China knows the movie, even though it was for many years not allowed to be seen. And then, of course, I know all these people who say they were in the movie. Guys, as you know, there were many of you who weren't in the movie who still say that they were in the movie. I've met so many people who said that they were. I mean, there must have been thousands of people that I hadn't seen that were in the movie. It's fine, because everyone felt like they were part of something that had happened there. Let it be. It was an incredibly important moment, and but it also works in another way. When we first arrived, and my father was giving these master classes, as Tiffany just said, the halls were filled. There were too many people. They couldn't fit in. They would laugh. They would clap. There was constant noise in the audience. And this was kind of the similar situation in the concerts. I mean, Chinese audiences I remember in 99 as well, to get an audience in China to shut up. I mean, it was really hard. But that's what it was, because there was something, it was a moment, it was a ritual that they were enjoying. And when they enjoy, they talk. And when they talk on the telephone, and they brought food. And it was really a festival experience. I can say now that the audiences in Shanghai are some of the best audiences in the world, because they listen so carefully. When I had the chance to do the B minor Mass 2.5 years ago, the silences between the numbers were, when we're on stage, we listen to the silence of the audience. And that silence tells us if we're connecting. And when everyone doesn't breathe or does breathe at a moment because of something that happened on stage, then you know that there's a connection. That audience is also part of this training. This audience that comes, it's a very young audience. It's 20s, 30s, 40-year-olds. They come with family. Many come with scores. I love performing there. And I wouldn't have imagined that quick a development would have happened. And it's wonderful. So there's something that is now gained. It's won over. You don't have to prove it. It's not because of curiosity that they come, but because there's a real passion to learn and to listen and to enjoy.
I picked up on what you said about listening, and I actually think in the quote unquote real world, the political world, which seems pretty unreal to me, but hey. Listening is really not a skill that many have.
No,
they're planning what their next thing is, right? They're not.
Right.
They're not really in a discourse.
No.
Well, I'm not going to get into that one, but I do think a lot about listening and listening as an active side, and I think Wang Jian and Tiffany both brought up aspects of that, actually. The idea that it's not only the musicians, it's the audience and their participation in that shamanistic kind of exchange, that very powerful moment. Tiffany, I know that you are playing and you have some involvement with the film industry.
Right.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you're bringing your musicality in your present situation.
Yes, I have been doing music for the movies since '97, but also I was in the orchestra, I played chamber music, I concertized and all of that. And also I played a solo in the film Anna and the King movie with Judy Foster and Chow Yun-fat. The musicality is also very important in the film industry as well, as we do not have a music ahead of time. So what we do is we go there, the red light's on, we have to do really quick and one take or two take and that's it. So by looking at you have to look at the music ahead of time and think, what to do, and of course follow the instruction of the conductor and all that. And it's just being incredible from the experience that I had with Mr. Stern, giving me the way. By the way, also the sight reading is very weak. All Chinese students. And from there, because we just practice, we don't sight read. And now, from what I've learned over the years, that we have to sight read and the whole thing, and just the dynamics, the phrase, the notes, of course, everything had to be done really quickly, and that really helped me to be successful in the film industry as well. And now I do both. I'm in the real estate, and that really professional discipline by doing music, discipline, and help me by doing business as well. So I do both at this moment.
So I would like to jump. We're kind of nearing towards the end of this conversation, which has been so rich. But one of the things I want to think about is, where do we go from here? What are things that we should continue doing, that we need to actively reactivate, in a sense? You know, kinds of exchange that David's been doing, that Wang's been doing with China. So how can we activate some of that work now? Why is it important, particularly in this moment in time that is, we've just gone through a pandemic. Many people say that in a way is a time of reflection. So I worry that some people are just going to jump right back into, oh, good, we're done with that. And that some people are saying, you know, we're in a different time. We need to bring that reflection into our work. So I'd be curious if from all three of you, we can hear a little bit about what you feel, where we should be going in terms of musical exchanges, and you know, and that includes both the audience and the musicians. And Wang Jian, could we start with you?
Well, first of all, in one of your clips, Mrs. Stern said music, one of the biggest functions is to make a better society. And I absolutely agree with that. First of all, I think from a smaller point of view, that a person who is always easily touched by music, who likes music, usually means that that person is more sympathetic or empathetic. And a person with that kind of sensitivity will have an easier time understanding other people. He can connect with other person more easily. And music brings out the beautiful part in our souls, in everybody, if they feel it. And because this is it's a process. Maybe it takes time, but I absolutely believe that music will make people more understanding and more sympathetic, and they would be more willing to feel the pains of the others. And I think one of the reasons the United States it is so powerful in this world, it is because actually it's culture. And I actually think the United States has an incredible culture, and it's one of the most powerful in the world in world history. Regardless of how you think about Hollywood, things like that, but the simple fact is that the whole world grew up watching American films, and in those films, many of them showed the humanity of the American people and the American culture, and it's something that everybody can relate to. And we watch these things, these American films, and say, well, we want the same thing as they do. And what makes them laugh, we would laugh. And what makes them sad, we feel sad. And that is why the American culture has built up such a following in this world. And because they are showing that they are human beings and that we can communicate and can relate to them. And I would say that I remember reading a book. I really forgot the name, but when I was very young. But it's about like two gangsters. They didn't like each other, and they were fighting each other. But somehow they end up growing old together in the very end of their lives, and they were forced to be together. So they start talking about their kids, their grandchildren. They have never seen those things. In the end, as they face death, and they start thinking, what did we fight for? What was that all about? So I think this is what is important. I think art and music shows all of us that we are all the same deep inside, because music, unlike language, unlike many other forms, is actually the purest form of human emotions. And the purest form, it's the most abstract. Therefore, it's not easily glued into some kind of ideology. It is. It can wake up everybody's soul. So I think this unites people and tells the people all around the world that, yes, we have our different ideologies, we have different ideas about things, but as human beings, at the top of the pyramid of our similarities, it's absolutely the same. It's absolute. We have our differences in the bottom of the pyramid, language, culture, ideology, whatever. But in the top of the pyramid, that very top, we are exactly the same. What touches us is the same. So I hope one day that we can really just focus on that instead of the differences.
I think that's important. And I just want to add one more thing when we talk about American culture, because American culture is many different things, which includes Chinese music, and it's wonderful in the film because you have that incredible erhu player, and I think the peepaw player as well, and you have so many incredible musicians who are coming from different traditions and are now a part of the American fabric. So I think of someone like Wu Man, for example.
Yes. Well, if I may add, what I think is that the recent rhetorics from the United States towards China is damaging that image of the United States. For many people in China, we're disillusioned a little bit. Because instead of this world we feel we can relate to, and then we hear this rhetoric sometimes it's quite unreasonable. Then we become disillusioned, and it's very sad for many of us to see that happen. And I hope this could change.
Yeah, I share that. I mean, I've spent my entire career trying to share Asian culture, and Asian culture, as you so well said, is really about sharing the things we're passionate about. It's not so much the geography. It's and music in some ways transcends because you're actively involved in a different way. Tiffany, what about you? A closing statement.
Okay, well, I think music is, like David was saying earlier, is a universal language. So we have to keep communicating each other using music. Just put the political aside, and we should continue exchange our cultures and Chinese culture and American culture. Keep the relationship going.
Thanks. David, you get the last word.
Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, I love your praising of American culture, but luckily I've been living in Paris now for 30 years, so I don't have to share your feelings about American culture. Because what makes an American laugh makes a Parisian cry, and definitely the vice versa. So I think, though, what you said before was really pertinent. You said, my father made people take off their mask. Now, I think there's no better metaphor for today than the idea of music making someone take off their mask. We've been wearing our masks for a year and 3 months now. And when we take off our masks, the thing about the pandemic is that it's touched the world, not one country, not one continent, the world. We've never had a phenomenon that has touched so many people in such a similar way. And now we are we're coming out of it. Of course, there's India, of course, there's Brazil, there are difficulties everywhere, but generally we're going into a certain direction. We need all of us to take off our masks and appreciate what it means to take off the mask. And music has the way of making understand how wonderful life is going to be post this mask. And if there's anything that we can do, it's just make music mean more. So just make music touch that place that we took for granted before. I'm thinking about concerts that I had done a few years ago, and then I think, oh, those days, and I think of how lucky I was for that moment, and how I didn't take that moment seriously enough. I think what we are going to face now is a moment. Yes, there will be many people who, out of need to make their jobs, to find gigs, to lead their lives, it will start up again. But I'm hoping that in the large picture, that we will understand that music has to mean at all times as much as we can possibly express. And if we manage to take off all our masks from time to time, then we will have learned a lesson from this pandemic, and music will be there to help us through. So let us all lose our masks together.
Bravo, David.
Yes, well said. I mean, it's funny because, you know, the Hamilton quote of being in the room where it happens. We all want to be in the room where it happens. And right now we're in a Zoom room, which is, you know, I hope that we will be able to share music in person and continue to find ways that these people-to-people exchanges can continue and really fight for this, because I think it's something that's really meaningful and important, and that passion is really clear. And Mr. Stern continues to inspire us, and in that way is completely alive. So we at the Asian Society are so grateful that we could show the film at this time and remember again not only the past, but where we're going in the future. I want to thank all three of you for being so generous with your time and sharing with our audiences some of your thoughts. I would encourage people to see the film, and I look forward to hearing everyone playing music soon in person. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And here at the Asian Society, we are continuing to show films from Asian countries, from Asian directors, from Asian-American artists that give you a new perspective and a new understanding of the world we're sharing. I hope you'll join us for some exciting films that are coming up. And I hope that if you are able, that you might consider a donation to the Asian Society. And if you're not, we're just grateful to have you in the conversation here. So thank you all, and good night.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you.